Sarah Martinez had always been small for her age. At 23 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed only 110 pounds. When she walked into the military base for the first time, wearing her fresh uniform with a Red Cross patch on her sleeve, the other soldiers looked at her and shook their heads. Some even laughed behind her back. "They sent us a kid," muttered Sergeant Thompson as he watched Sarah struggle to carry her heavy medical bag across the dusty training ground. How is she supposed to help anyone? She looks like she needs help herself. Sarah heard the whispers and saw the looks, but she kept her head high. She had worked harder than anyone else to get here. While other girls her age were going to parties and dating, Sarah was studying anatomy, learning how to stop bleeding, and practicing emergency procedures until her hands moved without thinking. She had graduated at the top of her medical training class, but nobody seemed to care about that. The base commander, Colonel Hayes, was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had seen too many young soldiers come and go, and he was not impressed when he met Sarah for the first time in his office. "Martinez," he said, looking at her small frame, "I hope you understand this is not a game. These men risk their lives every day. When they get hurt, they need someone strong enough to carry them to safety, not someone they have to carry." Sarah stood straight and looked him in the eye. "Sir, I may be small, but I know my job. I can do whatever needs to be done." The colonel did not look convinced. "We will see about that. For now, you will work in the medical tent. Basic first aid only. Do not try to be a hero." The other medics on the base were all men, and they were not happy to have Sarah join their team. Marcus, who had been a medic for 5 years, made it clear that he thought she was a waste of space. "Listen, little girl," he said on her first day, "this is serious work. Men's lives depend on what we do. Maybe you should think about working in hospital back home instead of playing soldier." Sarah ignored his words and focused on her work. She organized medical supplies, cleaned equipment, and studied the files of every soldier on the base. She learned their blood types, their medical histories, and any allergies they might have. While the other medics spent their free time playing cards or watching television, Sarah practiced her skills. The Navy SEALs on the base were the elite soldiers, the best of the best. They were big, strong men who had been through the hardest training the military could offer. 3 of them stood out among the rest. Jake Bulldog Williams was the team leader. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 240 pounds, and had muscles like a bodybuilder. He had been a SEAL for 8 years and had completed dozens of dangerous missions. Jake believed that only the strongest soldiers should be on his team, and he made it clear that he thought Sarah was too weak to be useful. Danny Ghost Rodriguez was the team's sniper. He was quieter than Jake, but just as tough. He could hit a target from over a mile away and move through enemy territory without making a sound. Danny had been injured twice in combat, and both times male medics had saved his life. He trusted only experienced, strong medics to watch his back. Tommy Tank Johnson was the explosives expert. He was the biggest of the 3, standing 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighing over 250 pounds. He could carry 200 pounds of equipment and still run for miles. Tommy thought that having a small woman as a medic was asking for trouble. During training exercises, the 3 SEALs would work with different medics to practice rescue scenarios. When it was Sarah's turn, they made their opinions clear. "No way," Jake said when he saw Sarah approaching with her medical bag. "I'm not going to pretend to be injured so a little girl can practice on me. What if we were in real combat? She could not even drag me to safety." Danny nodded in agreement. "She weighs less than my gear pack. How is she supposed to help us if we get hurt?" Tommy crossed his arms and looked down at Sarah. "This is not a game, kid. Real soldiers die when their medic cannot do the job." Sarah felt her face turn red with anger and embarrassment, but she kept her voice calm. "I understand your concerns, but I am trained and ready to do my job. Maybe you should give me a chance before you decide I cannot help you." Jake laughed. "A chance? In combat, you do not get second chances. One mistake, and we are all dead. I would rather have no medic than a weak one." The training officer, Lieutenant Brown, tried to make the SEALs work with Sarah, but they refused. Instead, they requested to work only with Marcus or the other experienced male medics. Sarah was left to practice with regular soldiers who were not happy about it either. During one training exercise, Sarah was paired with a young soldier named Private Kelly, who had twisted his ankle during a run. As Sarah examined his injury and wrapped it properly, Kelly complained loudly. "This is stupid," he said. "In a real fight, I would want a real medic, not someone who looks like my little sister. No offense, but you're just too small to be any real help." Sarah finished wrapping his ankle with professional skill. "Your ankle is just sprained. Stay off it for 2 days, and it will be fine. And for your information, being small does not mean I cannot do my job well." But Kelly was not listening. He was already telling his friends about the tiny medic who tried to help him. Word spread quickly around the base that the new medic was too weak to be trusted. Soldiers began requesting other medics when they needed medical help. Even for small problems like cuts or headaches, they would wait for Marcus or one of the other men instead of letting Sarah help them. Colonel Hayes noticed what was happening. During a meeting with his officers, he expressed his doubts about Sarah. "Maybe we made a mistake bringing Martinez here," he said. "The men do not trust her, and trust is everything in combat. If the soldiers do not believe their medic can save them, it affects their performance." Lieutenant Brown defended Sarah. "Sir, she has excellent medical skills. Her test scores were the highest we have ever seen." "Test scores do not matter if she cannot carry a wounded soldier to safety," the colonel replied. "Maybe we should transfer her to a support role away from combat units." Sarah knew that people were talking about transferring her, but she refused to give up. Every day, she worked harder to prove herself. She lifted weights to get stronger, ran extra miles to build her endurance, and studied medical procedures until she knew them perfectly. She also began studying the SEALs' mission files and medical histories. She learned that Jake had an old shoulder injury that sometimes bothered him. Danny had been shot in the leg 2 years ago and still had some scar tissue that could cause problems. Tommy had broken several ribs in training, and they had not healed perfectly. Sarah hoped that by knowing everything about the soldiers she might have to treat, she would be ready for any emergency. But no one seemed to notice or care about her preparation. The other medics continued to treat her like she did not belong. Marcus often gave her the worst assignments, like cleaning the medical tent or organizing supplies, while he and the others got to work with the combat teams. "Face it, Martinez," Marcus said one day while Sarah was scrubbing blood off medical equipment. "You do not belong here. These men need medics they can depend on, not someone they have to worry about protecting." Sarah looked up from her work. "I have never asked anyone to protect me. I am here to protect them." Marcus laughed. "You? Protect Navy SEALs? That is the funniest thing I have heard all month." As weeks passed, Sarah's situation did not improve. The soldiers continued to avoid her, the SEALs refused to work with her, and her commanding officers began to question whether she should be transferred to a different assignment. But Sarah was determined to prove that being small did not mean being weak. She continued training, studying, and preparing for the day when she would have a chance to show everyone what she could really do. That chance would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would change everything. 3 months after Sarah arrived at the base, the SEALs received orders for a dangerous mission. Intelligence reports showed that a group of terrorists had taken control of an abandoned factory building 20 miles from the base. The terrorists were planning to use the building to store weapons and explosives that would be used in attacks against civilian targets. Colonel Hayes called Jake, Danny, and Tommy into his office for a briefing. The mission was simple but dangerous. Get into the building, gather intelligence about the terrorist operations, and destroy any weapons they found. "This is a standard reconnaissance and destroy mission," the colonel explained, pointing at photos of the factory building. "Intelligence suggests there are only 5 or 6 terrorists in the building, but they are heavily armed. You need to go in quietly, get the information we need, and get out." Jake studied the photos carefully. "What about backup, sir? If things go wrong, how long before help arrives?" You will have radio contact with the base at all times, Colonel Hayes replied. If you need emergency extraction, we can have helicopters there in 20 minutes. Danny looked at the building layout. 20 minutes is a long time if we are in trouble. What about medical support? Marcus will be stationed at a safe location 1 mile from the target, the colonel said. If anyone gets injured, you can bring them to him for treatment. Tommy was not satisfied with this plan. 1 mile is too far if someone is badly hurt. We need a medic closer to the action. Colonel Hayes shook his head. This mission is too dangerous. We cannot risk putting a medic inside the building with you. Marcus will be close enough to help if needed. The 3 SEALs left the meeting feeling uneasy about the medical support, but they trusted their training and each other. They had been through dangerous missions before and always made it home safely. Sarah learned about the mission from Marcus, who was bragging about being chosen as the medical support. Finally, a real mission, Marcus said as he packed his medical equipment. The colonel knows he needs an experienced medic for something this important, not some little girl who cannot even carry her own equipment. Sarah watched Marcus pack his supplies and noticed that he was missing several important items. His equipment was not organized properly, and he had forgotten basic medications that might be needed in an emergency. Marcus, Sarah said carefully, you might want to bring more pain medication, and you should add extra blood clotting powder in case someone has serious bleeding. Marcus looked at her with annoyance. I've been doing this job since before you knew what a bandage was. I do not need advice from someone who has never been in real combat. Sarah wanted to help, but Marcus ignored her suggestions. She knew that the SEALs did not trust her, but she also knew that Marcus was not as prepared as he should be for this mission. The next morning, Jake, Danny, and Tommy prepared for their mission. They checked their weapons, communication equipment, and tactical gear. Each man carried over 50 pounds of equipment, including weapons, ammunition, explosives, and radio gear. As they prepared to leave, Jake looked around for Marcus. Where's our medic? We need to make sure he knows exactly where to position himself. Lieutenant Brown, who was coordinating the mission, looked uncomfortable. There's been a change of plans. Marcus called in sick this morning. Food poisoning. He cannot go on the mission. The 3 SEALs looked at each other with concern. Going into a dangerous situation without proper medical support was not something they wanted to do. What about the other medics? Danny asked. Can someone else take Marcus's place? Lieutenant Brown hesitated. The only medic available is Martinez. The others are on different assignments or training exercises. Tommy crossed his arms. No way. We're not going into combat with that little girl as our medical support. She cannot even carry her own equipment, let alone help us if we get hurt. Jake agreed. We should postpone the mission until Marcus is better, or we can get a real medic. The mission cannot be postponed, Lieutenant Brown said firmly. Intelligence shows the terrorists are moving their weapons tomorrow. This is our only chance to stop them. Danny shook his head. Then, we go without a medic. It is better than having someone who will be more of a problem than a help. Lieutenant Brown thought for a moment, then made a decision that surprised everyone. Martinez will be positioned 2 miles from the target with a radio and emergency medical equipment. She will not enter the combat zone, but she will be available if you need emergency medical support. The SEALs were not happy with this arrangement, but they had orders to complete the mission. They left the base at dawn, with Sarah following in a separate vehicle to her designated position. Sarah set up her medical station in a small abandoned building that gave her cover, but kept her close enough to respond if needed. She organized her equipment carefully and tested her radio communication with both the base and the SEAL team. This is Medicine 1, she called over the radio. I am in position and ready to provide medical support. Jake's voice came back over the radio, sounding annoyed. Copy that, Medicine 1. Just stay where you are unless we specifically call for you. The SEALs approached the factory building carefully. Using night vision equipment, they could see 2 guards at the main entrance and 1 guard walking around the perimeter. The building had 3 floors and multiple entrances, making it a complicated target. Danny positioned himself on a hill with a clear view of the building. As the team sniper, his job was to watch for threats and provide cover for Jake and Tommy as they entered the building. Jake and Tommy moved quietly toward a side entrance. They had practiced this type of mission dozens of times, and they worked together like a well-trained machine. Tommy placed small explosive charges on the door, while Jake covered him with his weapon ready. The explosion was small and quiet, just enough to open the door without alerting the guards. Jake and Tommy entered the building and began searching for intelligence about the terrorist operations. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. The SEALs moved through the building methodically, taking photographs of weapons and documents. They found crates of rifles, boxes of ammunition, and plans for attacks on civilian targets. But then, things started to go wrong. Danny, watching from his sniper position, saw movement that had not been there before. More terrorists were arriving at the building, carrying heavy weapons and moving with military precision. "Bulldog, this is Ghost," Danny whispered into his radio. "We have a problem. At least 12 more tangos just arrived, and they look like they know what they are doing." Jake and Tommy were on the second floor of the building when they heard Danny's warning. Through the windows, they could see the new arrivals surrounding the building. "We are trapped," Tommy said quietly. "Too many of them, and they know we are here." Jake tried to think of a way out, but before he could make a plan, the shooting started. The terrorists had spotted Danny on the hill and opened fire with automatic weapons. Danny had to move quickly to avoid being hit, but as he ran for cover, he stepped on a hidden explosive device. The explosion threw Danny 20 feet through the air and left him unconscious with serious injuries to his legs and back. Inside the building, Jake and Tommy heard the explosion and knew their sniper was in trouble. But they had their own problems. The terrorists had entered the building and were searching for them floor by floor. "Ghost report," Jake called over the radio, but there was no response. Tommy looked out the window and could see Danny lying motionless on the hill. "We have to help him. We cannot get to him with all these tangos between us and him," Jake said. "We need to find another way out of this building first." The sound of footsteps on the stairs told them the terrorists were getting closer. Jake and Tommy prepared for a fight they were not sure they could win. 2 miles away, Sarah heard everything over the radio. She knew the SEALs were in serious trouble, and she knew that Danny was hurt and needed immediate medical attention. She also knew that she had been ordered to stay in her position unless specifically called for help. But as she listened to the sound of gunfire over the radio and heard Jake and Tommy trying unsuccessfully to contact Danny, Sarah realized that following orders might mean watching 3 men die. She looked at her medical equipment, thought about all the training she had received, and made a decision that would change everything. "Base, this is Medicine 1, she called over the radio. "The SEAL team is under heavy fire and Ghost is down. I am moving to provide emergency medical support." Lieutenant Brown's voice came back immediately. "Negative, Medicine 1. Stay in your position. That is a direct order." Sarah was already loading her medical supplies into her backpack. "Understood, Base, but 3 men are going to die if someone does not help them. I'm going in." She turned off her radio before anyone could order her to stop, grabbed her medical bag, and ran toward the sound of gunfire. Sarah ran through the darkness toward the factory building, carrying 40 pounds of medical equipment on her back. The weight was almost as much as she could handle, but she forced herself to keep moving. Every few seconds, she could hear gunfire from different directions, and she knew the situation was getting worse. As she got closer to the building, she could see muzzle flashes from inside and hear Jake and Tommy shooting at the terrorists who were trying to reach them. But her first priority was Danny, who was still lying unconscious on the hill where the explosion had thrown him. Sarah approached Danny carefully, staying low to avoid being seen by the terrorists. When she reached him, she could see that he was badly injured. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood was flowing from wounds on his back and arms. Worse, he was not breathing regularly, which meant he might have internal injuries. Working quickly but carefully, Sarah checked Danny's vital signs. His pulse was weak and fast, which meant he was going to shock from blood loss. She could see that his leg was broken in at least 2 places, and there were pieces of metal from the explosive device embedded in his back. "Danny, can you hear me?" Sarah whispered as she began cleaning his wounds. "It is Sarah Martinez, the medic. You're going to be okay, but I need you to stay still." Danny's eyes opened slightly, and he tried to speak. "Cannot feel my legs," he whispered. "Am I paralyzed?" Sarah continued working on his injuries while talking to him calmly. "You have some spinal swelling from the explosion, but that does not mean permanent damage. I need to stabilize you before we can move you to safety." She injected Danny with pain medication and began the difficult process of stopping the bleeding from multiple wounds. The pieces of metal in his back were close to major blood vessels, and removing them incorrectly could kill him. While Sarah worked on Danny, she could hear the firefight in the building getting more intense. Jake and Tommy were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. They needed help, but Sarah could not leave Danny until his bleeding was under control. "Medicine 1, this is Bulldog." Jake's voice came over the radio. "If you're out there, we need immediate assistance. Ghost is down, and we are trapped on the 2nd floor with multiple tangos closing in." Sarah activated her radio while continuing to treat Danny. "Bulldog, this is Medicine 1. I have Ghost, and he is stable, but seriously injured. What is your status?" "We are surrounded," Jake replied. "At least 15 tangos in the building, and more outside. We cannot get to Ghost, and we cannot get out." Sarah thought quickly. She could not move Danny by herself, and she could not leave him alone while she went to help Jake and Tommy. But she had an idea that might work. "Bulldog, I need you to listen carefully," Sarah said into the radio. "In 5 minutes, I am going to create a diversion that will draw some of the tangos away from the building. When you see explosions on the east side, make your move toward the stairs." "Negative, Medicine 1, Jake replied. "You're not trained for combat operations. Stay with Ghost and wait for backup." "Backup is 20 minutes away," Sarah said. "You will be dead in 5 minutes if we do not do something now." Sarah finished stabilizing Danny's injuries and made sure he was breathing steadily. She gave him more pain medication and wrapped him in a thermal blanket to prevent shock. "Danny, I have to leave you for a few minutes to help Jake and Tommy," she told him. "You are stable now, but do not try to move until I get back." Danny grabbed her arm weakly. "Too dangerous. You're not a soldier." "Maybe not," Sarah said with a small smile, "but I am their medic, and my job is to keep all of you alive." Sarah left most of her medical equipment with Danny and took only what she needed to treat combat injuries. She also took 3 smoke grenades and 2 flashbang grenades from Danny's equipment belt. Moving carefully around the perimeter of the building, Sarah positioned herself on the east side, where she could see several terrorists guarding the exits. She was scared, but she remembered her training and focused on what needed to be done. Sarah pulled the pins on the smoke grenades and threw them toward the terrorist positions. Within seconds, thick white smoke filled the area, making it impossible for the terrorists to see clearly. While the smoke provided cover, Sarah moved closer to the building and threw the flashbang grenades through broken windows. The loud explosions and bright flashes confused the terrorists and made them think they were under attack from a large force. The diversion worked perfectly. Half of the terrorists inside the building rushed toward the east side to deal with what they thought was a major assault. This gave Jake and Tommy the opportunity they needed to move. "Now, Bulldog," Sarah called over the radio. "Move toward the stairs." Jake and Tommy fought their way down from the 2nd floor, taking advantage of the confusion Sarah had created. They managed to reach the ground floor, but they were still outnumbered and surrounded. "Medicine 1, we are on the ground floor, but we cannot get out," Jake reported. "Too many tangos between us and the exits." Sarah looked at the building and realized that Jake and Tommy needed more than a diversion. They needed someone to clear a path for them. She was terrified, but she also knew that this was exactly the kind of situation her training had prepared her for. "Bulldog, I'm coming in through the south entrance," Sarah said. Be ready to move when I give the signal. Negative, Jake shouted over the radio. You're not trained for this. But Sarah was already moving. She approached the south entrance carefully and could see two terrorists guarding the door. They were focused on the smoke and explosions on the east side and did not see her coming. Sarah was not a combat soldier, but she had been trained in basic self-defense and survival techniques. More importantly, she was smart and determined. She used the smoke and confusion to get close to the guards without being seen. Using techniques she had learned in training, Sarah disabled both guards quickly and quietly. She took their weapons and ammunition, even though the assault rifles were almost too heavy for her to handle effectively. Bulldog, south entrance is clear, Sarah whispered into her radio. I am coming in to get you. Sarah entered the building and moved toward the sound of gunfire. She could see Jake and Tommy pinned down behind some crates while 4 terrorists tried to surround them. Even though she was scared and the rifle was difficult for her to control, Sarah began firing at the terrorists from behind. Her shots were not as accurate as a trained soldier's would have been, but they were good enough to surprise the terrorists and give Jake and Tommy a chance to fight back. Who the hell is shooting? Tommy called out during a break in the gunfire. It is me, Sarah called back. Martinez. I'm here to get you out. Jake could not believe what he was hearing. The small medic he had dismissed as too weak to be useful was in the middle of a firefight, trying to save his life. Working together, Sarah, Jake, and Tommy fought their way out of the building. Sarah's diversion had drawn away enough terrorists to make escape possible, but they still had to fight for every step. As they moved toward the exit, Tommy stepped on a piece of broken glass that went through his boot and deep into his foot. He stumbled and fell, crying out in pain. My foot is cut bad, Tommy said, looking at the blood soaking through his boot. I cannot put weight on it. Jake tried to help Tommy walk, but he was too heavy for Jake to carry while fighting off the remaining terrorists. Leave me, Tommy said. Get yourselves out of here. We do not leave anyone behind, Sarah said firmly. She handed her rifle to Jake and knelt beside Tommy. I'm going to give you a shot for the pain, and then we are all getting out of here together. Sarah injected Tommy with a powerful painkiller and quickly bandaged his foot to stop the bleeding. Then, she did something that amazed both SEALs. Despite weighing only 110 pounds, Sarah managed to get Tommy, who weighed over 250 pounds, on her back in a fireman's carry. Her legs shook under the weight, but she started moving toward the exit. How are you doing that? Jake asked as he provided cover fire while Sarah carried Tommy. Leverage and determination, Sarah replied through gritted teeth. Plus, I've been practicing. The 3 of them fought their way out of the building, with Jake clearing the path while Sarah carried Tommy. When they reached the outside, they still had to get to Danny, who was lying injured on the hill. By this time, backup had arrived. Helicopters circled overhead, and reinforcements were engaging the remaining terrorists. But Jake, Tommy, and Sarah focused on reaching Danny and making sure he was still stable. When they reached Danny, Sarah immediately checked his condition. He was conscious but weak, and his injuries were serious enough to require immediate surgery. We need to get him to a hospital right now, Sarah said as she prepared Danny for transport. He has internal bleeding that I cannot treat in the field. Jake looked at Sarah with new respect. Martinez, how did you know he needed help? And how did you know how to fight like that? Sarah was busy preparing both Danny and Tommy for medical evacuation, but she answered while she worked. I have been monitoring your radio communications and studying your mission plans. When I heard the explosions and gunfire, I knew you were in trouble. As for the fighting, I may be small, but I am not helpless. Tommy, who was feeling better thanks to the pain medication, shook his head in amazement. You carry me out of there. I weigh more than twice as much as you do. Sometimes being small is an advantage, Sarah said with a tired smile. I could move through that building without being seen as easily, and I've been training with weights to get stronger. When the medical helicopters arrived, Sarah efficiently coordinated the evacuation of both injured SEALs. She provided detailed medical information to the flight medics and made sure both men were stabilized for the trip to the base hospital. As the helicopters lifted off, Jake stood beside Sarah and watched them disappear into the distance. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do. You saved 3 lives today, and you did it better than any medic I have ever worked with." Sarah was exhausted, covered in dirt and blood, and her hands were shaking from adrenaline. But she stood tall and looked Jake in the eye. "I just did my job," she said. "That is what medics do. We keep people alive." When they returned to the base, word of what had happened spread quickly. The story of the small medic who had saved 3 Navy SEALs became legend among the soldiers. Colonel Hayes called Sarah into his office the next day. His attitude toward her had completely changed. "Martinez," he said, standing up when she entered, "I have received reports about your actions yesterday. You disobeyed direct orders, but you also saved the lives of 3 of our best soldiers." Sarah stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for disobeying orders." The colonel smiled. "You also take full credit for one of the most successful rescue operations this base has ever seen. Jake Williams has recommended you for a commendation, and I am approving it." From that day forward, no one at the base ever questioned Sarah's abilities again. The SEALs specifically requested her as their medic for future missions, and other soldiers competed to have her assigned to their units. Marcus, the medic who had called in sick and missed the mission, found himself relegated to basic medical duties, while Sarah became the go-to medic for the most important operations. "How did you know you could do it?" Danny asked Sarah weeks later, after he had recovered from his injuries and returned to duty. Sarah thought about the question carefully. "I did not know if I could do it. I just knew that I had to try. Sometimes the only way to prove you are not too weak is to do something that seems impossible." Jake, Tommy, and Danny never forgot what Sarah had done for them. They became her strongest supporters and made sure that everyone knew that the best medic on the base was the small woman they had once dismissed as too weak to help anyone. Sarah Martinez had proven that strength is not just about size or muscle. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to give up when everyone else has given up on you.